Hello, and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. Now, the last segment I showed you a lot of flutes that I consider to be melody flutes. This is what I call them. They are based on like a recorder. They play somewhat like a recorder. Some of them are recorders. The penny whistles, the song flutes, the tonettes. A lot of these instruments play somewhat alike. They have similar mouthpieces. They have similar finger patterns. And so, therefore, I've chosen to do a music show on the recorder because almost everyone has one. Most children have one, and a lot of children learn how to play basic music skills on the recorder. So the question is, why would I choose a recorder? Well, I've given you some of the reasons, but I want to go over it a little bit. What is it about the recorder that makes it such a special instrument? I love to play it because my main instrument is a saxophone. This is where I started. I'm a classical saxophonist, and I added clarinet, then I added flute, I did some oboe, I did some bassoon. I don't have those two instruments, or I'd still be playing them some. And I've had a great time doing the woodwinds, but the recorder is special. So let me show you the advantages of learning music on a recorder. And it's not anything that's earth-binding, but just it is a real instrument. The recorder is not a toy, it's a real instrument. It's a real instrument. It pitches perfectly for the most part if you get a good one. You can play very complicated music on it. In Europe, there are recorder orchestras in which everybody is playing a form of the recorder, and they can play very classical, very complicated music. They are an amazing instrument. The fingerings are similar or the same on other woodwinds. If you play the recorder, you basically have a scale. Now, this is a C melody recorder. Most people who play it play the C melody. You can play scales on it. You can play it in the key of D. You can play it in the key of G. I can play it in F. I can play it in B flat, stretching it a little, but I can play it in several keys. But it's a very simple thing. You have your hand in a certain position and you play the scale. Most of the woodwind instruments are the same, more complicated, but basically the same. So whatever you learn on the recorder is somehow transferred to the other instruments. You can transfer them to the other instruments. Now, I pointed this out before, but you may not realize that the saxophone fingerings are exactly like the recorder fingerings for most of the notes. In fact, for the lowest scale, they're exactly the same. You play your C like this, like I have it, with your middle finger on the second hold down. That's exactly the way you do it for the saxophone. Now, there are more keys above it than you find with a recorder, but it's basically the second down. Then you flip. You lift the middle finger up and put the index finger down. That gives you your B. That's exactly the way it is on a saxophone. And then you go down. A, G, F, E, D, C. Now, the saxophone can get a B and a B flat that this instrument can't get. But for basically the C major scale, it's exactly the same. C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. The flute is very, very similar. It's a little bit different on the C, on the upper C and the D than you get in the recorder, but basically it's almost exactly the same. The clarinet, one octave is very similar. Now, the clarinet has two registers. It's a little more complicated because the clarinet has two scales. The upper scale for the upper register has completely different fingerings than the scale for the lower register. So we can't really include the clarinet in this. But for saxophone and flute and the recorders, they're basically alike in their fingering patterns. I mean, I could do a show just on learning how to play flute, or learning how to play saxophone, or learning how to play clarinet. You know, I could do that. But if I do a recorder show, I can, in a sense, get all of them in because of the similarities between the instruments. So the fingerings are all similar or the same as the other instruments. Now, what you learn in a recorder can be transferred to other instruments, and it is a good tone. A good costly, not too costly, but a fairly costly instrument can give you wonderful tone. They're uncomplicated in the fact that they're not complicated in their design. You don't have to worry about springs, pads, reeds, octave mechanisms, rods, and some of these other instruments, you put your finger down in one place and a key on the other end of the instrument opens up. You know, it's very complicated with rods. My father took my one of my saxophones apart, and he got it together perfectly. I don't know how he did it. There were rods and pads and reeds and springs, everything all over the place. They're very complicated. I don't know of any instruments that are more complicated than the woodwinds, because they have you've got to be an engineer to design them. You press one key, another key opens in another part of the instrument. Sometimes you use several keys. You've got side keys that you use, and sometimes, like with the saxophone, you've got 5 different ways to play a B flat. And so how do you want to play the B flat? Well, it depends upon the note that comes before it, and it also depends upon the note that's after it. So before you play a B flat, you got to know what note precedes it, what note goes after it, so therefore you can get the right fingering for it, so you can easily slip into the next note. Now, I mean, that seems complicated, and it is complicated. With a piano, you play one finger, one note, and that's it. For a recorder or other woodwind instruments, but particularly the recorder, you may have to play several keys, put down several fingers to get one note. And that's the way, of course, that it is with the flute, the saxophone, and the clarinet as well. So it's uncomplicated enough so you don't have to worry about things like this. In other words, unless you put it on a hot stove or do something really stupid, there's no way that you're going to do any harm to it. If it's going to be ready to play when you are, the only thing you may have to do is to blow it to get moisture out of it so it doesn't clog up some of the holes. It's easy to care for. There's not much you have to do with it to care for it, but I will be showing you what you should do. And almost anyone can learn how to play it. And you can also play in professional settings because it's an instrument that can fit in anywhere. As I said, in Europe, there are many, many orchestras that do nothing but recorder. So this is not just a toy. It's an actual instrument. I have threatened to put that on my tombstone. Remember, if I have any kind of legacy at all, the recorder is not a toy. It's a real instrument. So let me take and show you some pictures. How are these things made? What works and what doesn't work? We have here an instrument that is my version of the recorder. This here, from here to here, is going to be the head joint. This is going to be from here down to here. I can pull it apart. I'm not going to pull apart this one, but I can pull it apart. That is the head joint. There is a tube that goes down all the way through. You're not going to be able to see it, but if you were to look at it, if you were to open up, I will open up an instrument in a minute, so maybe you'll be able to see it. That's the bore all the way down. This is the head joint, the bore, also the body of the instrument, and the foot joint. And this here, where the opening is right below the mouthpiece, this part right here is considered to be the labium. And part of it is like an open space. It's like a little square. The square here is called the window. The rest of it is called the lip. So if I'm to look at it, here's the labium right here. And the top part, which is going to look a little black, I think, because it's an opening, a little square opening, is going to be the window. And this part which slants right here is going to be the lip of the instrument. Okay, so in the back, you see that there's a block. The block of the instrument is usually the same color as the instrument, maybe a little darker color, but usually they're fairly similar. This one's a little darker. It forms part of the mouthpiece, and every instrument has a block. excuse me. And then also you have that thumb hole. That thumb hole in the back, which is right here, is responsible for you to be able to get octaves. Without it, you wouldn't be able, well, you'd be able to get a few octaves, but they wouldn't be secure because you have to half hole that hole in order to be able to jump a note an octave. So, you know, every instrument's going to have a little bit of challenge, but it's really pretty simple in its design. Let me pull apart. I'm going to get one of the other recorders that I have here for the purpose of pulling apart. I didn't show it to you earlier. Here's another recorder. I really do like this one. I like the color. I like everything about it. But it's handy for me because it easily pulls apart so I can show you all of the three. All right, this is the head joint right here. This is the body right here. And what I'm going to do is pull off the foot joint. This is the body. Now you might be able to look through, I don't know if you can or not, and see that the bore, it's just that opening that runs all the way through. I'm not sure that you can pick up on it. It is pretty tiny. But if I look through it, I mean, I can look through it just like anything. It's like a little tube. So there's your bore. Now, when you put the instrument together, you don't just jam it together like this. I've seen people do this with flutes, and kids, like, there it is, together. And it always makes me cringe because you can really do damage to an instrument if you don't put it together right. So one of the first things you learn when you take lessons is how to hold it appropriately and how to put it together appropriately, especially the clarinet. Now, I didn't bring any of my clarinets with me today, but if you get that wrong, you have little keys and they have to go one above the other. And if you get that wrong and jam it together, you can damage those keys, and then you're going to have a repair job before you can play it. So you always take the instrument and you twist it on, like that. Just twist it on. You don't usually have to use Vaseline, but if it's really tight, you can use a little Vaseline. And this is the head joint. Here again, we just twist it on together, and we get it in the right position, and there it is. I use this instrument a lot because it's helpful. It goes apart easily, it goes together easily, and I can show people actually how to do that without any problem. So that's the way that they're made. What are the melody flutes? Let me show you. I just brought in some pictures here, sketches. This is a sassoto. Most of these I had with me today. The sassoto, always black, or at least mine are. The penny whistles, they're usually silver on the bottom, although some of them have been kind of made into like gold looking. There's some kind of a lacquer or something on them, so they look gold. And then they have different colored mouthpieces. Mine are black mouthpieces. I have one that's green. The recorder, this is the tonette. This is the song flute. This is the flutophone. They come in black with white or white with red. The white with red, I think, is the most popular, but they play exactly the same. The color has nothing to do. And these would be any other melody flutes, and I've shown you quite a few of them last time on the last segment. This would be an instrument like that. It has a fipple mouthpiece, and it's a little conical in its style. A lot of these instruments have the same kind of fipple mouthpiece. I want to describe this mouthpiece. So the fipple mouthpiece is important. They all play, most of them play with a fipple mouthpiece. This is a mouthpiece that you put in your mouth, and you can tongue it and blow into it. When you get used to it, it's very simple. You put your mouth on it about 1/3 of the way up. The way that you get your lower notes or your higher notes depends completely on how you finger them and the amount of air you put in. They're not hard to blow. Most of them are very easy to blow. There are a few that are harder, but those are usually the more inexpensive types. So this Fipple mouthpiece, this is what it is. And some of them, with a Fipple mouthpiece, have a wooden plug. I showed you last segment, but here's your wooden plugged Fipple mouthpiece. It's a long phrase, but that's what it is. And the instrument will have a softer tone, not as bright a tone, usually because of the wooden plug, but it doesn't change the fact of how you play it. There's a little opening from that plug to the top of the instrument where the actual air goes, and then you have your labium on the other side. It's a little bit different shape. You know, it works a tiny bit differently, but as far as playing it is concerned, it's about the same. The tone is just basically softer, that's all. And I have quite a few of those as well. So these are the major instruments that I would use, and they're similar, and I do teach from all of them. The melody flutes are going to include the recorders, penny whistles, sassotos, ocarinas, tonettes, flutophones, and melodicas. The ocarinas I didn't bring in today, but I have had them in before. Other woodwind instruments would include the saxophone, clarinet, flutes, oboes, bassoons. Of course, the piccolo is like a type of flute, pan flutes, harmonicas, and fifes. These are all what I consider to be the melody flutes. The regular flute instruments that are normally played are these here. The others also get included as melody flutes because they play in a similar fashion as the saxophones, clarinets, and flutes do. So I include them together. Some people might not. All of these instruments, they have individual characteristics. Every instrument I have plays a little different than every other instrument. Not a lot different, but a little different. That's okay. They're usually labeled according to key. A lot of them will have, especially the smaller ones, will have C or D or G written on them somewhere that tells you what key that they're in, but that's okay. If they don't, you're going to figure it out anyway. The larger the instrument, the lower the tone, and the softer the tone. When you saw the alto, I'm going to get that alto out again. It's longer than the C melody flute by quite a bit. In fact, if I compare it with the sopranino, which is the smallest, there's quite a bit of difference in their size. They're both in the key of F, though. If I play certain notes on the sopranino and play them on the alto, they'll be the same notes. They'll sound the same way, except this will be a much deeper, richer tone. So let me try that just for the fun of it. Here's the sopranino. I'm going to try the same thing, or basically the same thing, on the alto. Deeper, richer, an octave below, or maybe more than an octave below, but actually playing the same thing. Look at the size of the Fipple mouthpiece. It is much larger than this tiny mouthpiece if you want to focus just on the top. Look at this is the head joint. This does pull apart. I'm not going to do it, but it does pull apart. This is the whole head joint. The head joint here only goes up to here. That's how much difference there is in the size. Very, very small size. And yet they play and sound the same. If I'm going to arrange a piece of music so I can play it on the bass, and I wished I brought it in, but I just couldn't carry it with everything else. If I want to play a solo on a bass, or if I want to play a solo on the alto, sometimes I'll arrange it on the sopranino because it's in the same key. The bass is in F, the alto is in F, the sopranino is in the key of F. So if I play or I practice on one instrument, the notes will be the same if I use them on a larger instrument or a smaller instrument. It doesn't matter if it's in the key of F. No matter what you play, it's going to show the same. Now that we have this shot, this is a good shot. Let me get this up here. See the difference. What an amazing difference. And if I had the bass here, all 3 feet of it, you'd notice even a greater difference. So there's a lot to say about playing these instruments. They're a good choice of instrument. The larger the instrument, the lower the tone. The larger the instrument, you have bigger finger stretches, and it's harder to play and to do improvisations. On the alto, I don't do much improvisation on the alto because the finger stretches are so great that you actually can, it's harder to manage it. You have to have your finger covering a hole completely in order to get the tone. Now, if I don't have my finger exactly on the tone holes as they should be, I'm going to miss the note. Well, let me try it. I'm going to try deliberately to do it wrong. I don't get the tone because I've slid it off a little. I've like half-holed it. It's hard to do it because I'm so used to doing it the way it's supposed to be. But you can squeal them. It's easier to squeal the little ones than it is the larger ones, but they do squeal if you don't get the tone holes covered. I could probably get this to squeal on you. Let's see. There's the squeal. Not hard to do it on a smaller instrument. All I did was give it more air than it was supposed to get. And when you give it more air than it's supposed to get, you end up by squealing it. There's a lot to be learned about these instruments. They're fascinating. They're fairly easy to play, but they do have their challenges. Every instrument has its challenges. And I have people come up to me all the time and say, well, which is the easiest instrument to play? That's the one I want to play. And I'll always say the same thing. How good do you want to be? How well do you want to play? It makes a big difference. If you want to play well, you're going to have to practice and you're going to have to learn the technique, and there are going to be some challenges, and you're going to get used to that, and you work around it. If you just want something you can blow into, well, just blow into something, But you want to learn right. And so by teaching recorders, I can teach you the basics of all kinds of music. I can teach you the basics: fingering, reading the instrument, understanding the keys, knowing what the scales are, how to breathe, how to tongue. You can learn all those basic things that you have to know to play well, and you can do it easily, more easily in the recorder than you can on other instruments. So that's why I've chosen to focus on it. Plus, I do love the instruments. They are a blast to play, and you can play a lot with them. So I'm going to close it for now, and we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.